Well, welcome everybody to our webinar today. We're very excited to be able to host a conversation here at Mina Partners with Elisa Hutnick of Kelly Dry, the lead of the privacy practice over there, and my colleague Will Scatling, who's the director here at Mina Partners in the privacy strategy and AI governance service line. And thank you all for joining us today, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We decided to host this conversation today because, as many of you know who are charged with compliance, a number of state privacy laws have recently gone into force or are coming into force very shortly that have privacy impact assessment requirements embedded in them. And we're going to get into the details of what that looks like and what that means in just a minute. But before I do, just wanted to again welcome Elisa to join us today. Elisa, can you tell us just a little bit about your practice?
Sure. Well, first, thank you to Mina Partners. I'm delighted to be here and have this conversation. I head up Kelly Dry's privacy practice in Washington, D.C. I've been doing this for, well over 20 years. Time flies when you're having a great time. And what an exciting time to be a privacy lawyer. I spend, I would say, half of my docket working with all different types of companies on complying with privacy laws. I find I spend a lot of my time on dealing with issues in the digital advertising context in particular. That's where I think a lot of companies are just, their challenges there and figuring out how to match practices with the legal requirements and be successful. And then the other half of my docket is representing companies in government investigations, most of the time on privacy issues. And so it's really helpful to see how policy is pushing forward, and then how do you take that in real time and companies adopt that. I would say there's a lot of challenges companies are facing, unlike a privacy policy might update and post online, like to change the infrastructure, right? The overall program of compliance and how the company uses data. It's a brick by brick approach. And so it's challenging, but it's really interesting. What a great time to be a privacy lawyer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Wills and I know this, and it's great that we're the three of us are on the panel today because while I know you spend a lot of your time kind of analyzing law and thinking about the law and what does interpreting law, what does this mean for your clients, but from a very practical perspective. Wills and I, when we work with our clients here at Mina Partners, are kind of in the back of the house, working with IT owners, system owners, and compliance professionals and marketers, and really trying to figure out how to operationalize all of those. And that's always a challenging but very rewarding experience as well. So we're gonna tackle this from both perspectives today, and what we're gonna kind of focus on is this particular requirement of a lot of these state laws. We're going to talk about how we might gain some efficiency by finding out commonalities, but also where they differ in some nuances of doing risk assessments. And we thought we would start off by talking a little bit, and we were preparing for the session. We had a little bit of a planning session yesterday. We were talking about nomenclature and the word assessment, and how Wills and I are very familiar in our day-to-day work with privacy program assessment, i.e., looking at an entire program operationally from policy to procedure, et cetera, doing an assessment, as opposed to the assessments which are called out in these state privacy laws, which are really processing use, personal information and sensitive information use assessments, kind of risk assessments. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Elisa? Just kind of the difference in those terminology, those bits of terminology.
Sure. And when the point so resonates, because I have such empathy for so many of in-house counsel and privacy practitioners, because it's like you're taking back to those moments when you were in school and you had the big term paper due and you didn't know how to write that first paragraph. And sometimes the intimidation of I have to do this thing that has to get turned in just freezes you right in process. And so these laws now have given a name to this concept of risk assessment, but really what it is telling you, yes, you have to stop and think in advance to figure out, and they've identified certainly high risk, what these laws have identified as to be something of more legally significant potential harm to consumers, that you have to think ahead and you have to anticipate what are reasonable foreseeable harms, what are the practices, how are we going to mitigate those harms, and have some way of documenting that. So a year from now, 2 years from now, If a regulator were to ask, you can say, yes, don't just take my word for it. I did really thoughtfully consider that.
Mm-hmm.
But often it's, you have media coverage or something goes unintended and there's bad things happen. And then you have an investigation and you have to explain that was inadvertent, that was not foreseeable. Here's what I did. Here's how I mitigated. I stuck with the plan. I have a consumer protection law background. And before there were these specific laws, these were the kinds of things you had to do under just unfair and deceptive trade practices anyway, in the
Right.
data security context, in the marketing and billing context. This is just another flavor of the same thing of making sure your business practices do not introduce unreasonable harm to consumers in the pursuit of being a successful business.
Mm-hmm. And picking up on a couple practical tips, Elisa, from what you were just talking about, some things we talked about yesterday is one, in terms of this due diligence, this documentation due diligence, it doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be done. So don't think that you have to have, extraordinarily glossy reports for all of this. It's just a documentation. The other thing we talked about, this is just a good practical takeaway tip, is risk analysis, i.e., where are your high risk situations? Because if you're feeling overwhelmed, which is a very common response to these requirements, it's very important that you step back and look at your processing activities, where you're collecting personal information, how you're using it, what consent you're gathering, and decide on, based on the outputs, where are the harms most likely to be, reputational risk to the company, and also risk to the consumers, the individuals whose personal information is being collected and processed. And if you do that, you might find that there are a whole bunch of very low risk cases that maybe don't deserve your attention right away. But if you focus on those high risk cases, that might be a good way to maximize your efficiency.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point because anytime you have a journey ahead of you, which let's just say the path of completing risk assessments, and you think about what is the end point? Here's the technical full completion A+ standard of, and I question anybody who knows what that actually looks like, number one. Or number two is like just the concept that you have to do these risk assessments, but assess how many people are going to be leading this effort and be critically realistic about, are you able to get to there doing it on path A, or do you need to scale back? And to your point on that, this doesn't need to be super pretty. I think you need to be mindful of what your actual resources are. And given that, is your strategy to get as many as you can do and just run through them very quickly? Is your strategy to try to get a few really important ones done, but done like as fulsome as you can get? Or is maybe there like a Goldilocks approach where there's something kind of in the middle? You can always go back and refine and update. But I think to your point on prioritization, on what presents the most risk, what are we seeing regulators enforce the most? What does your house look like in terms of the assessment that you have done on some of those top tier issues that we know regulators are most concerned about, and have a really decent story to tell about those, and then start filling in the scaffolding as you build that program going forward on the risk assessment side.
Yeah, it's really clear and concise advice, Elisa. Wills, I know you work with a number of clients of different sizes and different sectors, helping them set up these risk assessments. What does this look like on a day-to-day kind of operational level? What has your experience been in terms of working with clients, the real nuts and bolts of it in terms of organizing this work?
Thanks, Dave. I think just to kind of echo back to what Elisa was saying, it's like, understanding where you are as an organization and where you want to go to is critical in your journey. So, with a lot of clients, we see there's this habit of if they've suddenly got budget or they suddenly realize they need to comply with these laws, they try and boil the ocean. And I think it's worth just stepping back a little bit and thinking, when we talk to companies, it's like, understand the journey you're about to go on, build a roadmap that's going to help you to accomplish what you need to, and make you, able to reach your goals, which, as Elisa was saying, you're realistically on day one not going to be able to go out unless you've got, one of these fortunate companies that has a very, very large privacy team or has massive amounts of resources throughout the organization. And I think we know that those are are slightly less than the norm. So it's about starting to understand those resources, understand your program. How do you align your program or integrate it with a broader data, data strategy within the organization? And I've heard you both talk about risk, and it's, again, align the risk to your broader risk management policy. Take the time to understand the culture of your organization. And, are you a company that's typically risk averse? Are you more tolerant of risk? If you operate in a highly regulated field, you're probably going to be more risk averse. So this is going to have a lot of, what we see when we talk to organizations is getting to understand them as a company. Elisa was saying, obviously the compliance with the legal mandates, that's what the laws are going to drive. The compliance side is how do you, yes, there are guidelines out there. Yes, regulators have issued guidelines, they've issued templates. I know the ICO and the CNIL, I often see those within organizations where people have used those as a starting point. But again, compliance is about how are you going to do it? It's, everybody is different. No one size fits all within an organization. And you should build a program that fits your organization, fits your risk profile. But always remember, and Elisa can talk to this much better than I can when it comes to the regulators, as she said, document, because if you have the misfortune that a regulator steps across your doorstep, you're going to have to, as the privacy officer, you're going to have to defend what's in those PIAs, those DPIAs, those data protection assessments, whatever they happen to be called. So if you're comfortable when you look at your process and your results that you think I can defend that to my steering committee, to my board of directors, are you also comfortable that you would be happy to stand in front of a regulator and defend the process and the outcome of that process and the steps you took to mitigate those actions? If not, you probably need to look at your privacy risk assessment process and make updates to bring it to a point where you would be comfortable defending your position.
Yeah. Wills, I was just reminded of a conversation that you and I actually had yesterday where we were doing a kind of post-project analysis for a client of how we went about things. And they, this particular client decided to take at the very outset of the project a very conservative, most stringent approach to all their processing activities, which on the face of it sounds like a nice, cautious, reasonable thing to do. But in reality, the way it played out was because they wanted to be so stringent and so detailed in every processing activity, it actually narrowed the scope of the work that could be done by having that much detail for everything without doing the risk analysis on, do we really need to go to this level of detail on all of these processing activities or not? We ended up not being able to accomplish as broad a task as we wished to be able to accomplish. So it's important to step back at the beginning of the project and really decide what that risk tolerance is, get that strategic approach nailed down, and then set about doing the work as you can. So
I think Dave, sorry, I'll say to your point there, I think that's why, what we're talking about here, every company's different. And, no one, as I keep saying, no one size fits all. And yes, did we have to go very narrow on a very small subsect of their processing activities? Yes. But if that's the decision that company wants to make and how they want to approach risk and how their broader organizational risk management policy aligns to how they're going to handle risk, then they have to work out how do they get the resources and the funding to be able to support that level of risk, or risk management, I should say. And that's the balancing game, isn't it? As you say,
yes.
It's like you have to decide as an organization what is an acceptable level of risk to you. What are the mitigation steps you're going to take to get you to that level? Simple things like encryption. You could encrypt everything within an organization. It would potentially paralyze your organization and it would cost you a lot of money to do. And it may not be necessary, but you may decide as an organization, we don't want any risk. So you understand that that's the decision you've made. And then these are the resources you're going to need to put in place and the steps you're going to need to put in place to do that. Don't think, necessarily you would recommend it, but again, it's at the discretion of the individual or the organization.
Yeah. Elisa, you had some thoughts there too?
Yeah, one of the areas where I see companies get bogged down, and I take your point, it really matters to be thoughtful at the outset, but sometimes we can get into a place where we're overthinking everything and also paralyzed in the thinking about the process before we
Yeah.
ever launch. You're right. And taking from the abstract to the very practical, I think there is a lot of benefit to just moving forward with a few privacy impact assessments, DPIs,
Right.
whatever level you want to do, and just within the structure we have now,
Mhm.
as we think through, pick some of your biggest issues, what does this process look like? Where are we finding that we are spending lots of time, or we're coming up, we don't have the necessary facts? We don't, where is time just getting sucked? And then taking that real time in your infrastructure, in your environment experience, and plugging that in, because I see a lot of companies, they're taking, either it's a consultant or maybe it's a template that was made for a different type of company or a generic type of company.
Mhm.
And it just doesn't work the
Trying to
way
make it
other
fit.
companies are organized. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a critical point is, and Wills, you said it earlier, every company is different, every culture is different, every risk tolerance is different. But to your point, Elisa, don't get, it's important to be thoughtful, but don't get too wrapped up in it. It's important to move too, to get some things done, to iterate. There's to that point, Elisa, I'm going to check out the question just came in. Thank you for an active audience. I meant to mention earlier, if you have questions, please post them in the comments. We'll try to address them as we go along. Elisa, can you talk a little bit about, from your standpoint, what you've seen in terms of these assessments, where companies can use kind of a base foundation assessment, and then where it needs to be maybe customized or tweaked based on the different requirements state by state? I know it's a general question, but just in general, what an approach might be to that?
Yeah, I am of the mindset, and you can talk to different lawyers, and different lawyers will have a different perspective. But I think whatever operationally you're going to have you're more likely to have more success and move the needle more. I'd lean on that side than having a perfect state by state version. I think to the extent you can have this would fit all states, I really would, at least for the risk assessment, because your mind doesn't, the stakeholders, they're not thinking about this on, let me think about this in terms of California versus, pick another state.
Right.
It's just not how it works in real life. And so I think, have the right facts. Can you have a process where you get what are the core facts and have the triggers so that you can very concisely capture what are those key facts you need to have for the use case, the practice. I think the point we were talking about earlier, being thoughtful on the front end. Are you going to do every digital advertising example? I don't think so. That's not efficient. So you have to figure out what's the category, what's the use case, and what level of practices at the category that you're going to be analyzing for the risk analysis. And that is easier to say than done in practice. And I wouldn't get stuck in being perfect on that. You might say, I'm going to focus on our web and our apps and do it in that context versus off platform. Come up with your buckets to do, because the facts are going to vary in those use cases. So that I'd really consider. And then make sure that you've got what's the harm. And the harm is what we hear regulators, what these laws were really drafted to try to protect, as opposed to going only thinking about it from the harm to the business and to the benefit of the business. These are consumer protection laws at their core. And so you are balancing benefits and harms both to business, to competition, and to consumers. And the whole point of doing this risk analysis is that you usually don't have a silver bullet. You are balancing, you are mitigating. And to Will's point, you have to be comfortable where you net out in terms of, do we feel that we've, based on our analysis, yes, there are some foreseeable harms, but they're minimal, they're de minimis, and we are okay with this. And we have a roadmap till when we get to a version 2.0 that even further updates the compliance. I have not yet seen regulators in the enforcement actions second guess a company when they have done a really thoughtful risk analysis. You might get feedback, on where the analysis stopped short, but we're not seeing second guessing if you've already gone through the process and really meaningfully tried to address the issue.
That's a nice segue, Elisa, to this first question, which I want to address. Personally, I've always been a big fan of the due diligence approach. You know, what you were just talking about is best faith effort. You know, getting started, getting things done, not getting paralyzed, and then rolling along with it. Great question from Duri K here. So, where's the balance so that the project does not get narrowed down and the compliance is not compromised? That's excellent, and that's what we're all seeking to do. That makes me think about the way we work at Mina Partners is, when we're on a project, we have weekly status update check-ins with our clients. And during those check-ins, we evaluate, what have we just accomplished? What do we have on our roadmap for the coming week? And we take that time, if we need to pivot and to make a change, because things happen. It's a dynamic environment. So by setting up a cadence and being able to check in and make sure that we're on track on a regular basis, I think that's one of the ways that you can best assure that you're trying to strike that balance between not letting the project get bogged down and looking for that compliance that you're seeking. While we're at it, we have another question that just came in. Does anyone have suggestions to tooling software to track, store PIAs, especially as they may need to be updated in a streamlined manner? It's a big question for companies. When do you move from manual processes that are labor heavy, for instance, using the Microsoft Office suite and, you know, keeping things in Excel sheets, to an automated platform? Mina Partners and Elisa and Kelly Dry share a mutual technology partner in the Catch platform, privacy management software platform. OneTrust is obviously a big name that's out there as well. There are many other players in that field now technologically, so it's worth exploring. Feel free to contact us after the program if you'd like to dig in a little bit deeper to that question. But it is a big question to when to make that move to go from manual processes to automation. Any thoughts there, Elisa?
Well, I think a couple of things are really important in that consideration. One, your resources and your budget. And I would zoom out before I zoom in on particular dollars, because there is manpower, there is time, there is risk when you're doing things manually. So there are some front-end investment considerations if you're going to go to a tool that might make that more efficient. And so you kind of have to really think about the value, the people time, the tooling time, and the risk exposure and what you're saving. I will also say this is such a fluid time when it comes to software. And it's also a little bit of the Wild West on how companies and tools are describing the tools that they offer when it comes to risk assessments. So I would highly recommend that if you are even interested, picking your head up to see what is available, I'd get beyond the labels and I would do some demos to see, all right, what is plan A, plan B, plan C based on different providers? What does that look like? And how would that fit within your environment? And how much does it depend on having other tools that they offer to make the full benefits of it work? Yeah,
terrific. Thanks. Wills, your thoughts on automation and tools?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? You think back to maybe 6-7 years ago, and there was, if it wasn't for DLP, there probably wasn't a privacy tool out there if you went to conventions or if you went online and looked it up. And now you walk in an IAPP event and it's like a trade floor. I mean, it's like Elisa was saying, it's like pick your head up and take a look, walk down an aisle. There's probably 10, I'm being conservative here, but there's probably 10 or 20 companies you could talk to. They're all going to have something slightly different, and they may work for you as an organization. They may not. They may fit well with your culture and your existing stack of platform or computer stack, or they may not. So it's worth taking a look, and obviously it's a force multiplier for you as an organization. It reduces risk because you get consistency in how you approach the compliance aspect of your process. I think one thing to think of is, if you are going to start down the road of looking at technology, is understanding what the funding and the costing is going to be to you and making a strong business case at the outset. We all know that budgets are tight, and to walk in and ask for a significant amount of money for a technology solution without metrics to back up the reasons why is probably going to be a very short conversation. So to take a step back and think about what metrics, if you're looking at acquiring or buying a software solution, think about the metrics that you will need to put in front of, whether it's senior management, steering committees, the board, whatever it happens to be, to raise the risk, or to raise that request up and justify the reasoning for why you want to head down the road of bringing in a technical solution to support you.
Yeah, that's great. And the other thing that I really want to highlight with regards to the consideration of bringing a platform in house and getting that set up is, don't forget, this is just, it's software and it's a tool. And it's going to take people, both internal people and external people, to make that tool accomplish the task that it was set out to do. So consider your implementation costs, consider your support costs, consider who you have inside that's going to be trained up as staff to be able to really utilize the functionality of that platform and tool. And that leads me to something else I wanted to talk about, back to assessments, which is that in order for your assessment program, as it were, to be effective, you're going to have buy-in and cooperation and understanding and relationships with people in various business units within your organization. Marketing, legal, IT, to name just a few. Elisa, I'm sure you've seen this in terms of working with your clients. You're not going to have an effective assessment program if you don't have folks within, sometimes the term privacy champions is used, within these departments that understand what you're trying to accomplish, understand the compliance mandate, and willing to actually help out and do the work to evaluate and provide these assessments. What thoughts on that?
Oh, it's so true. I mean, there's the psychology here too. Anytime you want to bring people along, you can't be viewed as the person who says no, the wall, it's where things go to die. And I think sometimes when you're facing new compliance obligations, maybe you've not had a lot of years of practicing this, like that's really scary. It feels like there's a lot of responsibility in not letting legal violations just kind of fly past your desk. And so there's the balance of understanding the why, understanding that if we can't go this way, is there a way that we can do it another way? But still, let me understand what the goal is, and let me understand creative ways to get there and still meet our legal compliance obligations. And that having somebody believe that you are just as invested in helping get to the finish line is really important, so that they come to you and they want to talk and actually be open with the facts, and you're not pulling teeth to try to get the little pieces of information. And that means some front end and ongoing investment. I always say, like, either sugar, caffeine, or a beer to try to, have ongoing dialogue so that you're seen as a stakeholder instead of just compliance. And obviously that's going to vary depending on the culture of every organization. But at the end of the day, you're working with people and you want people to trust you. And that really matters to being a lot more efficient and effective as an overall team, making sure that everybody is looking out for what's important there to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
And I think, Dave, to your point on the privacy champions, I totally agree. I totally buy in on the concept of a hybrid privacy governance model where you have those champions. It doesn't mean that every organization, unfortunately, has them. So I think it comes back again to understanding your resources, as we've said from the beginning. Is like, if you are a centralized program and everything is run out of the privacy team, and that's the decision you've made at an organizational level, then you're going to have to build a program that can be like at Lisa was saying, you're going to have to adapt that program to what you have. Suddenly changing course halfway through and saying, okay, we're going to go out there and train up 50 privacy champions. You've got to get buy-in across the organization. You've got to get department leads to agree to allowing a certain percentage of time for their resources to be focusing on privacy work. It's not a short process, and I've certainly done projects where we've stood up hybrid systems and we've stood up privacy champion programs. It takes a long time, and if you're going to do it right, you need to invest a lot of time and money and to get that right. But I am a big proponent of it. I think it's the best way to be able to get the message across an organization and ensure compliance across different business units. But if you are unfortunate enough that you don't have that option, then I think we come back again to technology. How do you force multiply your privacy team? Because privacy teams are not big, and there's only so many hours in the day. And again, technology will help support that privacy team and help them to be able to build a compliant program.
Yeah.
One point I might just add on that, because I am seeing a trend that's a newer trend. We have different generations in the workforce, and I would say that there's a notable set of generations that really care about privacy in their personal life in a way that I would say maybe my Gen X generation, like that was a newer thing. And what I'm hearing from regulators is they're getting a decent amount of what we'll call privacy whistleblowers, of people in the organization who are concerned with certain practices. And that is a source of how regulators initiate investigations. It's not just consumer complaints, but it's the whistleblowers. And so I think that comes back to culture. And the force multiplier point by Will is like, yes, technology is really important. I think doing quick hits, just the law is moving so fast, enforcement, risk, exposure, all of those, like make it real and not abstract. And we just got finished with Privacy Week, and we did a decent number for a number of clients of like these quick hit webinar, lunch, meet and greets, just focusing on a particular set of issues that are really relevant to the business. Because when you can improve understanding of how things have changed, but hear what others are doing, everybody wants to hear benchmarking, that at least can help. You're on an effort to change hearts and minds in the way things were always done. But I think it is a collective effort to make that happen and get everybody on the same page and comfortable asking questions.
Yeah, that's terrific, Lisa. And unfortunately, we're just about out of time here, but that's a good place to stop. And it made me think too that while we're focused here on talking about compliance and how to stay within compliance and avoid regulatory enforcement actions, let's not forget that this is personal information that customers, especially for B2C companies, are stewarding. And basically there's reputational risk and there's trust involved. And so think about that. Don't forget to pull back and understand that this is an issue where you're being asked to take good care of the personal and sensitive information that's being turned over to your organization. So with that, Elisa, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today and to share your thoughts. It was wonderful having you here. And Wills, thanks for taking time out of what I know is a very busy project day for you as well. So, and most importantly, thanks for all of you who took a little bit of time to listen in either live or to this recording. Really appreciate you being here. Hope you found some things of use that you can carry back to the office. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, our contact information is scrolling there along the bottom of the screen. So with that, I'll say goodbye, take us to a program close, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Take care, all.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Lisa.